So you've nearly made it. One more panel, and then everyone can go and collapse. But first, this is translating off the page, which is going to be all about all the activities translators involve themselves in that are not sitting at a computer typing a book. How all that contributes to careers, work, and how it nourishes the translation field generally. And the thing that brings the four of us together is that we all either are or have been translators in residence at the Free Word Centre in Farringdon. And probably some people here will know it, some won't. So I'll just say it's a building that houses, it's an organisation in its own right, and a building that houses other organisations that all work for either literacy, free speech, or literature. So English Pen are based there, Article 19, Index on Censorship, the Reading Agency, Arvon, and others. And they recently started this program called, these translator residencies. Nicky, Harman here, and Rosalind, Harvey here were in the first year, and Janan and I are doing ours now. But I'll just introduce everyone slightly more fully than that. So starting at the far end is Janas Marasligil, who's a writer, literary translator, editor, screenwriter based in Amsterdam. She works in English, French, Turkish, Dutch, and Spanish. And in literature and comics from Turkey, Algeria, and the UK, she edited, translated, and published an anthology called Turkish Contemporary Literature. And in her spare time, no, I'm joking. In the middle is Nicky Harman, who translates from Chinese to English, fiction and poetry of authors including Han Dong, Xin Ran, Hung Ying, Jan Ling, and Yen Geling. Yeah? Okay, good. We had a little rehearsal. She's a regular contributor to some online magazines, including Chutzpah, Paper Republic, and Words Without Borders, and she set up the China Fiction Book Club, which is based in London. She's also been a mentor for the British Centre for Literary Translation and has taught literary translation for the BCLT, that same organisation, and Birkbeck. Thank you. To my immediate right is Rosalind Harvey, who's the translator of Juan Pablo Villalobos's Guardian First Book Award shortlisted Down the Rabbit Hole, and Enrico Villamatas's Dublinesque, which is on the shortlist for the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize, and Oblivion by Hector Abad. And she also says in her bio that she runs the occasional translation-related event in an attempt to remain sane, more about which shortly. And she founded and is the chair of the Emerging Translators Network. Do ask her more about that if you'd like to know. So, first of all, everyone's just going to give a bit of a summary of their residency projects. Okay, so these translator residencies that we're doing at the Free Word Centre, what they've involved, why we've done them, and what they contribute. So, who wants to start? Votes. Nicky Harman.
All right. Well, when we started, we had a blank page on which to do pretty much whatever we could think of, and I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'm going to be very Chinese. I'm going to talk about the three eye-openers, and I'm going to talk about the three things which I really enjoyed doing. One was a book club. We ran a what did we call it? A speed dating book club. Speed book clubbing, which was wonderful from the point of view that it was extremely little pain and the maximum gain. Rosalind and I ran it together, and it created a huge amount of goodwill. I think this is probably a word I'm going to use quite a lot when I'm talking about the things I did at Free Word Centre. It created a huge amount of goodwill. People who liked book clubs and people who'd never even been to one before had short stories to read in advance, translated from 4 languages: Chinese, Spanish, Russian, and I've forgotten the last word, Swedish. Yeah. And they got a chance to talk about it in different groups and then come back together. That was a one-off event, but it's a pattern that could be very easily repeated. The next thing, which we were actually asked to do in one form or other, and which turned out to be unexpectedly difficult but then extremely rewarding, was working in schools with children. And I eventually did succeed in getting a few events going in schools. I got a clip from a Chinese cartoon. It helped that I was particularly fond of this cartoon and kept laughing every time I saw it, no matter how many times I saw it. It was called Monkey, or Xiyouji. And I took it into schools. Again, this was a one-off event in each school. But I told the children that by the end of an hour, they would be able to translate from the Chinese into English. And my goodness, they could. And what was wonderful about it, although it was just a one-off thing, was that the children were so enthusiastic and seemed to get so much out of it, and so did I. How actually you follow school events, if you kind of parachute in and parachute out again, is something which those of us who've been involved in school events are continually talking about. In the time available, I was only able to do some one-off events, but they were great fun. The third thing which I did, which I think I found the most difficult, but which I think is quite important, is blogging and writing the occasional newspaper piece, sort of blog type piece. I've done it occasionally for The Guardian when a short story that I translated was being put online. I regard it as incredibly difficult because it's like dragging words out of a stone, me being the stone. But it is also, I think, very important to be able to put your new literature into some sort of context for the reader who may never have read a Chinese short story before. So the three openers, because each of them taught me very different things, and I'll probably go on doing something like that in the future.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. Janan?
Yes, well, I just started my residency in 1st of March, so I'm not even in the middle of it at the moment. But we did start a whole there has been a preparation period that started in August, so that's really, I think, important with these residencies. Not like you just arrive and start working. You need to prepare. Like Nikki said, there's work with schools that are involved, and you don't just go to a school, say, I want to work with you. You need to prepare again. So I started working already in August. And like something Nikki just said here is really important. It's about context. So there's a reason why I do translation. I do translation because I want to share narratives that are not heard with different readers. I want to share stories that you would normally not be able to hear about because of many different reasons, whether it's the way the industry works, whether it's the way censorship works or whatever. And this is mainly why I do everything I do. So translation is one of these things, and everything I do around, like this residency, helped build into that. And this is why I consider everything I do like some sort of translation, even if it's not sitting behind the desk and writing. So now with the Free Word Center, I have this amazing opportunity to do basically what I want with these ideas. They just tell me, you have here, the floor is yours. You have all these amazing people you can work with. There's English Band, there's Index for Censorship, there's the reading agency, there's this and that. And I'm like, okay, wonderful, I'm going to work with all these people. And they just welcome you openly. And this is what's wonderful about this space. They really want to hear what you have to say. And you just start a discussion with these people, and then projects come up. Like what we did with the schools. We started working with the Islington Word Festival. I started to share ideas about what I think about Turkish literature, what I think about translation. And together with Islington Word Festival, we invited schools to join us to do projects around comics because we wanted them to express their own ideas about their heritage, about language, about what it means to be a Turkish student in London through comics. So, of course, it's not directly translation, but again, it feeds into the wish to giving a voice to people. And this is how I try to use translation and language, comics and contemporary literature. So I will have several workshops with schools and students in London. And in the end, we will give the chance to these kids to show their work, which is also very important, because it's not just about making them and you need also to share it. And again, we come back to the sharing element of literature, comics, and translation. So that's mostly, in a nutshell, what I'll try to do, and also work with authors from Turkey, inviting authors from Turkey to come here to London and to help them meet new readers. That's mostly what I'll do, yes.
Okay. Thanks, Janan. We'll come back to the details of a lot of that, I should think. I realised I did these in an illogical order because much of Janan's residency is still to come, but to go back to another that is now in the past, Rosalind, Harvey. And I'd also invite you to tack onto the end of your summary what you feel the legacy of your residency could be said to be.
Well, Nikki's already spoken a little bit about the speed book clubbing event that we did, but I'd also like to add that one of the best things about that event was that it got people talking. I mean, one of the aims, I think, of our residency, because it was the first time it had been run, so it was rather terrifying, and none of us really knew what we were doing. But the flip side of that was that we were allowed to do whatever we wanted to do. And I mean, that's still continuing now. It's just a great opportunity to work with all these different organizations and to be based in this space where wonderful things just happen, because there are so many inspiring people based there doing interesting things to do with literature. But one of our aims was to get people talking about literature and translation in new, exciting, odd and unexpected ways. And the book club was brilliant because we had these 4 groups, as Nikki was explaining, in different corners of each of the room, all reading stories in translation from 4 different languages. We rang a little bell after they'd been in each group for 15 minutes, and then they moved round to the next group and discussed another story in translation. And at the end of the session, we had everyone come back together in the middle of the room and talk about their experiences of reading these stories in translation. And the one key thing that emerged from this was that nobody really minded or cared they'd been written in translation. And as translators, maybe that we might find that a little bit troublesome because we care about translation, we want to discuss the process of translation. But essentially, what's most important for readers is good stories, and these people were just really wanting to talk about the stories, the characters, what was happening in these books. And the fact that they were translations didn't trouble them in any way, didn't upset them. The other event that I ran, which was also ran here yesterday, I don't know if some of you in the audience may have played it, which was the translation game Word Keys, which I developed in conjunction with a brilliant organisation called Coney. If you ever have a chance to look them up, then they're just wonderful. They're a games designer, and what they do is they work with other organisations and they organise real-world games for adults, so for people who haven't had a chance to play since they were children. And they've done various commissions for lots of different arts organisations and also corporate organisations. And I went to them and I said, I want to develop something which is a kind of game, a bit like a treasure hunt, where people have to use translation and different languages to move around a physical space. And initially I wanted to do it on Exmouth Market, which is a wonderful market just around the corner from the Free Word Centre. We ended up running it on Brick Lane for various reasons. And it's a really nice way of getting people to talk, to think about cooperation and about language exchange and about links binding people together. Initially, the way that it's set up is you have 2 different rival teams and you sort of pit them against each other, so they can't approach each other, they can't talk to each other, they have to uncover clues and open locked boxes. But the beauty of it is that at the end of the game, both teams have to cooperate in order to win, so everybody's a winner. And we ran it 4 different times on Brick Lane during the Sunday market. And the most interesting thing about it was that every time it was run, people interpreted the clues in completely different ways. So it actually ended up being quite a nice metaphor for literary translation as well, because people used different approaches in order to get to a result which worked, but it was different every single time. So it's quite nice as a metaphor for how translators all approach the same text in a very different way, but end up with a nice version that works for someone at the end.
Thank you.
Ollie, yours is right in the middle. Tell us about yours.
Okay, yeah. I'll also just sum up mine. I didn't say my name either. My name's Ollie, as you can see on the screen. I introduced everyone else, but not me. So my residency is almost over because it's run January to April inclusive. But just to mention a few, a few highlights. I had one panel discussion, which is photographed over there actually, about translation and language in the media. That examined basically word choices in news rhetoric, where translation is pertinent to that. And we had a controller of language services from the World Service, an expert on diplomatic language, and Joe Glanville, the director of English Pen, speaking about that. That's one. One other I'll mention is still coming up. It's a project about translation of poetry between British Sign Language and English. And I'm doing that with two schools, one a school for the deaf in King's Cross called Frank Barnes, and the other Gospel Oak School. And a deaf artist and performer is going to be facilitating some workshops along those lines, and then we'll be showing the results in an informal event for the children and their teachers and any parents in a couple of weeks' time. So that's me. To go back and pick on you first, Rosalind, if I may, and ask about legacy, because you did your residency a year ago now or slightly over. Tell me, or us, what's happened since and how that's related.
Well, in terms of a legacy for myself as a translator, can you hear me? I mean, for me, it was the first time that I'd run any kind of public event, that I'd done the amount of public speaking that I had to do during the residency, and it was a real eye-opener. I mean, I was very much out of my comfort zone, but it showed me that I can do it, that it's possible, that there is an audience for translation-related events, and they're really keen to hear about it and to talk about it, to have a discussion about it. But also that it's quite a good way of supplementing your career, your income as a translator, in several ways, I think. In one way, in that it's a way to get you away from your computer screen, which is always nice. It's always nice to have a more varied professional career. And while I was doing the residency, I would have sort of 2 or 3 days in the week when I was translating, and then the rest of the week I'd be planning free word events or running free word events. And it was such a nice balance to have. I couldn't ever do one of those things exclusively, because I think I would go mad. But having the balance was really, really invaluable. And I've run the translation game quite a lot of times since the residency. So that one has definitely got legs. And it's also, doing any kind of event is a good way to create more visibility for yourself as a translator, but also for the profession as a whole. So you do these events, you're putting yourself out there, you're more likely to meet people who might give you a job, you can just have a nice discussion with, talk about translation some more. So you're killing all those birds with one stone, really. And in terms of the Free Word Centre, I mean, I think because Nikki's events and my events were maybe not the first ones to do with translation, but it was the first time there was a specific program of translation-related events, and so we hopefully opened the way to more of that kind of event happening at Free Word.
Thank you. And Nikki, I know that there are 4 headers that we're going to cover, I think, which are schools, book groups, games and festivals. We've touched on all of them already, but we'll go into them in a bit more detail. So Nikki, I wondered if you could start us on schools, because that's relevant to the legacy, sorry to keep using that word, of your legacy of your residency, because you've had some projects that have gone beyond it, haven't you?
Yes. For various reasons, I didn't actually manage to do any events in schools until the moment when I was just about finishing, and after I'd finished my residency. I didn't feel that mattered. I just wanted to carry on doing it. I mean, I was really enjoying doing it. In terms of it was good to be able to say at the beginning that I had come from the Free Word Centre and to talk about that a bit. After that, anything I did in schools began to take on a life of its own, and I was going into the schools as an individual. As far as my professional work goes, that was okay. It also has its own problems in that if you're going into a school on your own, the kind of legacy you leave behind you can be minimized. It's actually much better, I feel, to go in as part of a group of people who may be going into a school doing related activities and so on. So I was very happy to do all those events, and I did it. I even did a couple of things in primary schools, which was a lot of fun. Again, using the same clip of the same animated film, which is amazing. It seemed to just cross all the age barriers and entertain everybody. But I think that kind of thing is finite unless you can be part of an organisation. So I haven't done any for the last few months. But if anyone asks me, of course, I'd do it again. And I'd especially like to do it in tandem with teachers who are doing something related in that school, so that what I was doing could be part of work the teachers had done before, could be part of what the teachers were going to do with the children afterwards.
So for anyone thinking of putting on that sort of thing, what sort of structure or organisational support do those projects need?
Well, Translation Nation is the most obvious organisation. And some people here will know about it and be far more qualified to talk about it than me. But Translation Nation started by working with primary school children, and I believe is now about to start working with secondary school children. So Google them, find out all about them if you're interested. And I hope one day that they'll include Chinese in their secondary school work, which at the moment they haven't, but they're only just starting it.
Janan, you've got some projects coming up in schools that you might tell us about?
Yes, of course. Talking about how you get into schools, of course I'm working with the schools because I'm translator in residence at Free Word Center, because we're working with Islington Word Festival. I didn't just knock on their door and, hello, I'm a translator, I want to work with the kids. That's not how it works, of course. And the schools, it's also very complex to work with schools because the teachers have a lot of responsibilities, not only teaching, but also outside administrative responsibilities and things like that. So they are very busy people, and you need to fit into what's already there. So not go there and say, give something completely new, but fit into an existing program. And that's the best way, I think, to work. And this is what I'm doing, for instance, with Islington Arts and Media School. I'm going to be part of one, they always have, every day they have this extra hour after school where they discuss their day, and I'm going to be part of that, for instance, and I'm going to go there 5 weeks in a row, so every week for 1 hour. And what we're going to do with these kids is link them to their parents, because we want them to do work with their parents, for instance. So I'm going to meet the parents as well. So that's going to be the very fun part. And I'm going to work with the schools, starting to work on storytelling methods, using words, language. And because these kids are from Turkish backgrounds, we're going to work a lot on their Turkish heritage. And I'm going to ask them to interview their parents. And then, in the end, a comics artist is going to join me, Carrie Fransman, a wonderful comics artist based here in London. And we're going to finish the workshop together and ask the kids to draw all that. So I'm not sure what's going to come out of that. To be honest, it's a risk. I mean, you never know. Maybe it won't work, but you can't know if you don't try it. So it's just a test. We'll see how it goes. But I'm sure they're going to make amazing work, because kids, if you give them tools, they come up with wonderful stories. You just need to give them the space and the tools. And that's, if you want to work in schools, you first need to love the young people. If you don't like young people, don't go into schools, because it is something about them that you need to want to make them share their creativity and their stories with you. And for that, you need to love them. So, and work closely with the teachers. That's also something I would tell you. Teachers are extremely important. And you need to work with them, talk to them about what you want to do with the young people, and have their feedback and their ideas as well. Include them into the whole process. Otherwise, it won't work. Another school I'm working with is Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, also in Islington. I'm going to join their breakfast club. And it starts at 8:30 in the morning. And I'm really not a morning person, but I'm going to do it because I love the kids. And we're gonna work on storytelling around food. And in the end of that, again with the comics artist, I'm going to ask them to make comics with food. They don't know that yet. They don't know it yet, but we're going to do that. So you see, what I'm trying to do with my whole work is to try to find other ways of telling stories using different kinds of languages. And this is also, you can call it some sort of translation as well, taking food and, so that's, we're trying to be creative about what you can do and how you can tell stories and how you can give these tools to these kids to tell them.
So new, fresh ideas,
Yes, yes.
fresh food,
Food and
organisational
comics.
support, and good contacts with teachers and so on, all necessary for those projects. Something probably easier to mount yourself is a book group, right? So I wonder if you, Janan, could speak again about that project of yours.
Yes, we did a book group around Peri Hamadan's novel Ali and Ramazan. It was really important to do this because I invited Peri Hamadan to come to the Free Word later, and we did an interview on Monday. And it was so important to prepare actually the audience because again, you have a writer, nobody knows her here, okay? So it's the first time people hear about her, they don't know her work, so there's no point doing an event if nobody knows who she is. So that's why the book group was really helpful into getting people interested in her work, discussing her work, and so many great ideas came out of this book group. I thought people really felt about the work. And then we had the interview on the Free Word website. So this is all step by step, constructing, developing the audience that will then come attend an event and meet with the writer. So that's, I think, part of the whole translation process as well.
Okay. So it nourished your event, and the event and the book group were sort of both made mutually a bit more attractive or interesting, and you managed to get an audience who knew the work of the writer who might not have previously, right?
Exactly, and the audience who was there asked really good questions to the writer, and the writer appreciated that because she could see that there was some preparation done. So I think that's also very important for the writers when they come here, that they can meet an audience truly interested in their work.
Okay. I can't think of a neat segue onto the section about games, which is what we're now going to talk about. Do ask questions if you want to know more about any of these things we've touched on, though. And Rosalind, because your game, you've had it here at the book fair, and it was part of your residency, and people may know, people may have played it, and you told us a bit about it in your intro. Why did you want to do it exactly?
I wanted to do something that was as far removed from sitting down with a book and a dictionary as possible. And I'd seen games devised by this group called Coney before. They do a lot of stuff with an organisation called Guerrilla Science, who run science-based events at music festivals. And the idea of those is just to get people. They're not educational games. That's the wrong way of describing it. It's just to get people thinking about something other than what they normally think about, to move people out of their comfort zones and get them relaxed and laughing and talking to strangers, doing things they wouldn't normally do out in the street. And if they learn something, that's great. But it's sort of a side benefit. And I saw a game that they developed at a music festival, which was based on the production of a certain kind of drug. I can't remember which drug it was, but the idea was that you yourself were the pill, and you had to go through this production process. And there was a kind of it was sort of like an assault course. So there was a bit where you had to put on a rucksack and a pair of shorts, which had inflated balloons attached to them. And these were representative of certain elements of the drug. And so people were putting on these daft outfits, and then they had to tunnel under some kind of netting along the ground. They had to run across a channel of, what's that stuff called, which is, it's liquid if you put your fingers slowly into it, but if you punch it, then it becomes a solid.
And you were seeing all this and thinking, this reminds me so much of literary translation. I've got to make a game out of this.
Yes,
yeah.
It reminded me so much of my daily struggles with a book. But it's just a really fun thing to do. And I thought if I can do something to do with that, relating it to translation, to words, to foreign languages somehow, then this would be good. And I'd already spent quite a bit of time on Exmouth Market. Eating my lunch when I've been at Free Word, and I thought, you overhear so many different languages on all of these London markets, and I thought if we can do something that's a kind of treasure hunt where people have to speak to these people, use their languages to somehow uncover clues, and then there's some kind of exciting denouement at the end, wouldn't that be great? And David, the guy who developed it with me, he developed a game in Australia which was to do with, there were two different groups of people in two different rooms separated just by a wall, and they had to knock on the wall and translate the knocks using some kind of set of codes that they'd been given in order to ultimately unlock a box which had something in it that was the prize. So the kind of bare bones of the game were based on that. And I just told him that I wanted it to be based somewhere in a market where there were lots of languages, and to use phrase books with lots of different languages. That people didn't necessarily have to speak the languages. The idea was that the foreign languages were there, but you wouldn't actually be translating them yourself. You'd be using these phrase books to translate them, and you'd be thinking about the way that foreign languages are like a code, and then once you have access to that code, it opens up so much more. In terms of culture, in terms of food, in terms of people, in terms of everything. So the way the game works is that you have 2 teams of people, and each team is given a locked box, which has something mysterious inside it. They're given a phrase book, and the phrase books are... the phrase books in the initial version of the game were antique travel books. So when I ran it here, it's particularly nice because the book fair can be a slightly sterile environment removed from real books, so it's quite nice to have these nice physical books with yellowing pages with bits of foreign languages stuck all over them. And each of the phrase books have 2 different languages in, and we try and make it so that one is Roman script and one is a script that people may not have seen so much of. So with this year we had Turkish, because it's market focus, we had Korean, we had Croatian, and we had Norwegian we had Danish, with a little bit of Norwegian and Swedish thrown in just to confuse people. And the teams are given an envelope each, which has their first clue or direction on the front in a foreign language, and they have to use their phrase book to then translate that instruction, which then takes them to the next stage, which is somewhere within the fair. They then open their envelopes, and inside their envelope is a certain amount of money, which they're instructed to use to buy something to eat and share. And this year, I gave one team enough money to buy a cookie to share, and they were the rich publishers. They had enough money to buy some food, and the other team had 4 pence, and they were the poor translators, and they had to go and get a free coffee from the Turkish stand over there. So the teams at that stage are in different positions in the fair, and then they're then instructed to look for the next clue, which is on a giant piece of card, which has something on it written in a foreign language, and that I've artfully hidden in somewhere in the fair. When we did it on Brick Lane, it was hidden. It was stuffed in a usefully sized hole down a urine-soaked alleyway, and they had to really get in there to pull this thing out. It was quite disgusting. And this final stage, you can work it 2 ways. So you can either have it so that this clue on the giant piece of card leads them to the next bit of the fair, where their key to their box is hidden, or else they end up finding the wrong clue, and it's the other team's clue. And at that stage, they then have to swap clues. They either have to use a stranger to go over to the other team, and yes, this is the urine-soaked hole, and somebody trying very hard not to touch it. And there's Nikki playing the game. This is the final point of the game. So yes, the final point of the game. Once they've managed to figure out the final clue, they open their boxes, and each team in their box has one half of an instruction, which is written in English, and it tells them to make their way back to the starting point and form an archway with the other team. And the game is won when they manage to get a stranger to pass through the archway. And this is the final point here. Nikki forming the archway.
One more there. Is that you as well?
Yes, that's also the game. That's on Brick Lane. Okay. And it's totally chaotic. I was completely out of my comfort zone. I was really worried the first time it ran that it wouldn't work, that people wouldn't be able to interpret these clues. But people are surprisingly flexible when you give them a structure to work within, and they interpreted it differently every time. So the idea with the original time I ran it, I think the idea was that the key they found was for their box, and they would open it, and then they would have this piece of paper or the other half of paper. And I think the second iteration that we ran it, there'd been some confusion with the previous clue, and they ended up with the key to the wrong box. And I was thinking, what are they going to do? They won't be able to open their boxes. It's all a failure. We have to stop now. But we just waited a little bit, and they managed to figure out that they had the wrong key. And one team threw their key across the market to the other one, and another team just co-opted a stranger and gave the guy this key and said, can you go and just give it to those people over there? We're playing a game with them. They need to open that box. And the guy was confused, but he went and did it, and they managed to open the box eventually. And everyone interpreted it differently, but everyone managed to get to the end and to form this arch and to get a stranger. On Brick Lane, it was usually somebody half drunk to walk through the arch. And yeah, it's a great deal of fun.
Okay. So you can see you're some way now from sitting alone at a laptop with your dictionary.
Just a little bit.
Right. Right. I want to talk a bit about how all of those things combine to make a career and also an income. Something else we said we'd talk about is how we put together a living as literary translators, and that'll probably often involve some work for free, some that's paid, some that's translation, some that's related to it only, some that's probably completely different. Nikki, could you start us off?
Yes, but I also wanted to say something about book club before I did.
Okay.
It kind of ties in.
Go ahead.
I'll get there in the end. First of all, I wanted to say that I was in Canan's book group with Ollie and Ramazan, and I was also at the event when the author came along, and it is exactly what she said. It was wonderful. I knew absolutely nothing about Turkish literature, so there I was coming at it just like an reader. So it makes it, in a sense, it made it much easier for me to understand how people come to Chinese literature in English. It was totally strange to me. And it was a great experience, and it was really nice to hear the two of you talking, the author and Canan talking at the later event. So I think those kind of book clubs are extremely worthwhile. There is something slightly related. We're going towards Ollie's question, and that is a book club, translation club that I run called the China Fiction Book Club, which is basically a group of people who can read the original language. And we have occasional evenings where we read a piece of a novel or a short story, and we then collectively translate it, which people who've been on translation courses will recognize that kind of technique. But since it's completely voluntary, if you're prepared to go, you're usually prepared to make it into a very entertaining as well as a very interesting event and go to dinner after and so on. What I've realized from having run that for a couple of years, so it predates my being translator in residence and then carried on after, is that it has a huge impact on people who may have thought about translation in a very vague sort of way, but not actually done it. And various people who were in that book club, and this is entirely credit to them, not credit to me, went on to become translators and to do translations, and now I keep seeing their names popping up as fully fledged translators. No, it doesn't make any money, but the more translators there are, for example, from Chinese to English, the more work there is around, and the less publishers can say, oh, well, we'd love to translate from Chinese, but we can't find the translators. Now there are a far bigger group based in the UK and elsewhere, and so there is more work coming in. So in a very indirect way, it's had an impact on my career. The other events, the school events that I've done, well, they've given me a certain, I suppose, visibility, and I usually haven't lost any money on them. Occasionally I've got a fee, usually I've got my fares paid. It's had a kind of, it's a kind of parallel activity to the translation, and it's not a money spinner, but it's something that I wouldn't have been without. I think sometimes you have to be prepared to do something for almost nothing, because it gets you known, it gets the ideas, the creative juices flowing in myself as well as in other people. And that's all I have to say about it. See, I did get back to your
You
question.
did, absolutely. And now smoothly on to Janan. You've got a particularly sort of rich portfolio. Tell us what all the different bits of it are and how they add up.
Yeah, well, I don't earn my living from translation. That's going to shock you maybe, because but it does help. Everything I do in translation helps me find all the other jobs I do. For instance, just to give you a concrete example, this anthology I'm doing, a yearly anthology with French publisher Publinet. I have completely carte blanche. I can do whatever I like, invite the authors I want, translate whoever I want for this anthology, and I work closely with the publisher on this. It's an independent publisher. They don't have any money, but we decided to take this risk, to do it together, because actually nobody commissioned me to do this. It's because I felt strongly about certain writers and certain voices. And for me, it was more important that this exists. That was my first goal, not earning a living. My first goal was to make this happen. Then, with this, of course, what happens? You start networking. You start talking to authors. You start talking to their agents. You start talking to other translators. So you build a whole network around you. And what does that bring to you? First of all, you get expertise as well. People see you as an expert in a certain field. And that opens other doors. They invite you to chair panels. They invite you to write articles. They accept you on a residency like it happened here at Free Word Center. And so, you see, I mean, what you do, it's also something that, see it a bit as like going to university. You don't get money when you go to university, but then you get a diploma that helps you do other things. This is a bit also, I think, that's how you can become an expert in your field, by working on it. But I also understand that some translators don't do it this way, and this is totally respectable. I mean, every translator has to make their own choice. It's not because I do this way that it's the right way. No, we all make our own choices. Some translators, they say, no, I only translate when a publisher asks me to do it and pays me for it. This is totally okay as well. It's just not the way I work. I don't like to be told, like, translate me this. I'm not interested in that personally. I'm interested in scouting. I'm interested in finding a new voice myself and then say, who, and go try to find a publisher for it. That's more the way I work. So, and I also work a lot, as I said, for me it's very important also to showcase the work, not only the translation process, but then how do I present this work? How do I make other people read this work? I use social media a lot. I use the internet a lot. I use all these new technologies a lot. And there I built another expertise around social media. So what do? I also work with organization as a social media expert. And that pays well. That pays very well. So you see, and I always stay with organizations I feel strongly about as well. So I don't work with banks or things like that. For instance, I work with European Cultural Foundations because I care about what they do. They also want to share narratives, untold stories. So again, it links into everything I want to do. I work with organizations that have the same goals as I do, and using my different skills to do so, and earn money, of course, because we all need to pay rent.
So those are all related in some way, I think, and all contribute to your profile as a translator and your work, and there's a lot of sort of cross-pollination by the sound of it. Rosalind, should people starting out in literary translation expect to be able to make a living from it full time?
No. Well, it depends how frugally you're happy to live, I think. I wouldn't advise it, speaking from personal experience. I mean, I think there are very few literary translators who just do that. I think most of us have some other string to our bow, even if it's very closely related to literary translation. So now the other things that I do are things like this, running a translation game or speaking about translation or teaching translation, so that they're closely related. I think I know maybe one or two translators who just do that. And even they also run events. They don't just sit with a book for their whole lives. I mean, apart from anything else, it's not particularly healthy for one's brain to do that, or one's body. I think
even if one wanted to be a translator at home on one's own all day, all week, that's actually getting harder because the visibility of translators is increasing. So is popularity of events around books and festivals.
Yeah, that's true, and you'll often be...
You know, translators are invited to those quite frequently now.
Yeah, and you'll often be co-opted to take part. That makes it sound horribly violent. To take part in the promotion of a book that you've translated, and it makes sense to do that because you believe in that author, you're the expert in their work, you're the one who can talk the best about what they've produced. And it increases your visibility. There'll be publishers and agents and other authors at these events who will subsequently, potentially, you will work with. So it makes sense to not be, the traditional hermit-like translator in that way.
Ollie, I want to say, I don't buy the thing that we do this alone. we're never alone. I mean, we have the work with us, of course, and we need other people to look at what we've done. I don't believe it's possible to have a good translation without anybody else tapping into it. And I think it's really important for us translators to be supportive with each other and be able to talk about the work, even from other languages. Now, I'm really lucky here, for instance, I met a wonderful translator, translating also Perian Madden into English, and she's here, Lucy. And we talk about the work together, and this is really helpful because it helps her understand certain things when she translates into English, and it helps me because I translate her into French. And I think this is something we should do more, you know, really share certain things about the books we love, the authors we really want to translate, and not be transparent about what we do. I think translation is a very generous act, and not only with the work, but also within the networks of translators. So this is something I think it's very important to highlight.
So it's necessarily collaborative.
Yes.
Both that and the related activities.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone want to ask anything about festivals, book groups, schools, games? Yes?
You went to this game design company and you said, I'm with the Free Word Centre, we'd like to run a game. They gave you a design. You ran the events there, Brick Lane, and now here, yesterday as well. Now, we as translators, we're fairly concerned about copyright and intellectual property ownership. Did they get a fee from yesterday?
No, they don't, but
okay.
they received an initial fee from Free Word via me for the design of the game, and half of that fee went to the organisation itself, and they put that back into their projects. The other half goes to the games designer as his fee for doing it.
Right.
And I mean, they're a very small organisation. They're very happy just to be name checked every time I run it, and I have run it about six times since the first time. I'm running it again twice as part of London Literature Festival on the South Bank on the 25th and 26th of May, if people are around. But no, they come up with these ideas, and they're just happy for them to grow and to have legs and to run off and do their own things.
Which is eventually what we see happening in our work as well.
Yes, it's true. It's comparable.
I'd just like to ask about the book groups. Did you use published translations, or did people volunteer to translate short extracts that you then used?
They were published translations. Yeah, and the book groups were a mixture of pre-existing book groups and then some that we sort of invented for the event. So I think the China fiction book group was one, wasn't it? And then the Swedish story was read by a group that already existed. But I think the other two, the Russian and the Spanish, we sort of invented those book groups for the event, and then we invited members of the public to come and join those book groups. But yeah, they were all published translations.
Anyone else? No? Yeah, one in the middle.
Hi, so I know Nikki from Chinese to English translation. I'm part of Paper Republic as well, and I just wanted to ask the panelists and Ollie, so if you work from languages so different from English, and I feel like you're trying to make awareness of these languages and also into English and the literature of these countries, do you ever either say to editors of publishing houses or editors of literary magazines that we're going to do events with you and translators into English, or do you say that, do you ever go beyond just the civic realm and go into sort of publishing where the books are being produced? It's to everyone.
Personally, I'm not totally sure I've understood. Do you mean when we're submitting work to publishers and magazines, do we say we're prepared to do events too?
No, I mean, do you do any events with publishing houses and editors, people who are choosing literature to publish?
Yeah, I think there's lots of that sort of thing that goes on. I mean, a pretty classic format is for an editor to interview an author and a translator. I've seen a lot of events of that sort. I was one of a number of co-translators of a book that came out last year, so another of my co-translators and I were in a translation duel like the one that was here before this slot. So we were looking closely at different translations of a new story by that same author. I know there's a literary magazine called Asymptote that started recently. You've probably heard of it. That's involving translators as much as or more than any other kind of contributor, as far as I can see, in their events. Anyone else?
It's good you mentioned Asymptote. It's not going to answer your question directly, but when we talked about money, for instance, Asymptote, they don't pay because they don't have the means to pay at the moment, but they are creating, again, a market. They're trying to create a readership. And so it's a wonderful way, for instance, also to showcase your work and to showcase authors you love. So and you talk about events. That's also some sort of event. You know, I think we should also look at the online space as many opportunities to run events on the online space, on Twitter, social media, and using platforms such as Asymptote, for instance. So yes, I think definitely.
I haven't worked much with publishers on actual events, except for one time when the author and I, when the book was published, we ran an event together in Oxford. So that was really like an author's evening, but I was there as publisher. I was there as translator, and the publisher organised it. I would love to do more of those. One of the features, I suppose, of translating less translated languages is that often you're translating for publishers on the other side of the world. And so that may be one reason why I haven't been involved in a lot of those events, because often I'm not translating for UK publishers. But I'd certainly love to do more of those, either in festivals or events specially organised by the publisher.
I think, were you asking specifically about less translated languages?
I was asked, well, from Chinese particularly, I find that most editors, actually I was actually asking about pre-publication, like, you know, so to get more books from a language rather than the ones you've already done. So if you want to increase the number of, you know, I don't know, 5 books per year to 10 books per year, then I think the people maybe you want to influence are editors and publishers. And so you guys are very active. So is there any way of saying to people you've worked with, I want to start a dialogue or, I don't know, something like a book club, but for industry people?
I've been incredibly unsuccessful. I think somebody yesterday said that they don't pitch anymore to publishers because it's a mug's game. It's a huge amount of work, and quite often, most of the time, in my case, I think in the case of the person who said it, it wasn't fruitful. It just didn't, you know, what the publisher wanted was somehow something different. I think it is very difficult to do that. It would be wonderful to feel that you had a good enough relationship with publishers that you could create that dialogue. I'd love to know the magic key.
And now publishers are less, you know, they're taking less and less risk, you know, with the market. Obviously, it's difficult to sell books more and more. I had my experience with Turkish literature to French. It took me years and years to find one publisher. I kept going to publishers, proposing works, and they were like, yeah, but how can we sell it? It's nice, but we can't sell this. Because they have a certain idea of certain types of literature. You know, Turkish literature should be that kind of literature. That's the only thing they can sell to their audiences. So that's coming back to the risk again. You're taking risk. I found a publisher who was open enough to help me take that risk, and we take it together. And it's going to take years to build that audience. I know it is going to take years. Now we have 200 readers, I think, for the first anthology, which is, you can say, oh, that's so small, it's not worth doing it. I think, no, it exists, it's there. And we continue doing it until we have a bit more and a bit more. And also, it's okay to have niche audiences. It's fine. We don't always need to have millions of readers. I mean, every kind of literature can have its niche audience, and it's also okay. It's also okay to run an event and only have 30 people showing up. That's fine. The most important is that you touch people.
We're getting towards the end of our time. Anyone more questions? No? One at the back there. Yep.
Harmony here. Can I ask, what is your opinion on people who write a foreword or an introduction or a translator's preface to books? I like to read, if I'm reading something translated of a culture that I don't know, I like to read the introduction, and I like to know, for example, in the translation slam we just had, that Nasli Hilal means ginger moon or koi crescent, and the decisions that have been made.
I think most translators would probably be pretty delighted to be asked to write some kind of introduction or even translator's note. It's not that common in trade publishing. The idea reminds me a bit more of scholarly texts. No?
I don't.
Go on.
I mean, it depends. If it's for an anthology, yes, definitely you need one.
Oh, yeah.
But if it's for a work, no. Why should I? I mean, because the work in itself has to exist, and as a translator, I want to disappear. I'm sorry, it is not my work. It's the work of the author.
Well, the translation is your work.
The translation is my work, but I don't want them to feel they're reading a translation. I don't want to tell them, the readers, look, you are reading a translation, and this is a difficult cultural context you may not understand. No, it's about human stories. It's about
Shouldn't they know they're reading a translation? Shouldn't they be thinking about that?
Yeah, they should know. Of course, they should know they're reading a translation.
Can I say something? I disagree.
But they should. I mean, just they shouldn't be guided in the reading. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. Not that they know. They should know. Of course, it's a translation.
I've been asked to write translator's notes for practically every book that I've had published, and sometimes I wonder really whether it's necessary. But if I do, or when I do, I try to make it as approachable as possible. I put in a bit of information that they wouldn't otherwise know. I explain a few basic things that readers who are reading from Chinese may not understand. Usually there's a note about names, which I try and keep as short as possible because that's kind of boring. So if I have to do it, I make it as light-hearted as possible, the kind that I would like to read myself. But I'm often getting asked to write short forwards, not long academic forwards, although I greatly respect some long academic forwards that I have read from translators, but that's not really my thing.
And a good translator's note it can be more like an apologia than a reading guide, rather than telling someone how to read it.
I think it really depends also on who the readership is, who you hope the readership is going to be, what the publisher is doing, what position the publisher has. So, for example, one of my publishers and Other Stories always do a foreword, not by the author or the translator, by a well-known writer to translated texts. So the introduction to the most recent book that I've translated by Juan Pablo Villalobos has been written by Neil Mukherjee, and it's a way of allowing readers access to something that maybe they might be less likely to pick up because they've not heard the name of the author. And I would love it if they just picked him up anyway, but maybe they wouldn't. And so if they see this name on the cover and they have a sort of, he's opening the door and he's ushering them in, he's showing them a welcome mat. So I think it can work in that respect.
To loop back a bit, if I can, there was some front matter in the Turkish edition of Ali and Ramazan, the book we did for Janan's book group, taken out of the English translation, wasn't there?
For instance, look at this liberty they've taken with that book. They took out the first 2 pages of the book, the most important 2 pages that were telling about the ending, because the author wanted that to be there, and they took it off. So I think all this work you talk about, of course, it's important to acknowledge, of course, the translator's name should be on the cover even, I think. But that's, in many countries it is. It's still not the case in here. But those things can happen outside. They can happen at events. They can happen online. And we're in an age where you have access to knowledge. You don't know something, Google it. I mean, it's not that complicated if you want to learn something. So it's not us translators, it's not my responsibility personally to teach people about Turkish culture if a book is about Turkish culture. It's my responsibility to make them feel what the author wanted to make them feel. That's more important, I think.
Okay.
I'm not a cultural ambassador.
Well, that got us going. Thanks. And it's 4:00, so that's it for this and for the fair, I think. Please thank Janas Portfolio, Nikki, Harman and Rosalind Harvey.